Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for coming. This event actually has its origins from an initiative taken by the Israeli ambassador to Ottawa, Rafi Barak, and I think he deserves a good word here. He put as one of his high priorities promoting scientific cooperation between Canada and Israel. And for the purpose of this, he put me and Ted Hewitt, the president of the Social Science and Humanities Research Council in Canada, together. And as a result of our ongoing discussions, this event is taking place. So as I say, one good word to Rafi Barak. And I thank Ted for his steady input and collaboration in planning this event. Given that we have invited representatives from funding agencies around the world, and we've asked them to provide us a bit of information about their own funding agencies, I'd like to say something about the Israeli context. Say something about higher education in Israel, funding higher education in Israel, and specifically funding research in higher education in Israel as a background for the discussion today. So here in Israel, we have 8 research universities. In addition, we have a sum total of 63 institutes for higher education. In addition to the 8 research universities, we have a variety of academic colleges, engineering colleges, and teachers' colleges. The budget for higher education in Israel is actually, I would say, rather generous. The budget comes to close to 3% of the national budget. And for the last 6 years, the budget for higher education has been steadily increasing in real terms. The institutes for higher education are governed by the Council for Higher Education, which was brought into existence by virtue of a law. The Council for Higher Education is responsible for accrediting programs of study, for quality assessment, and for opening or closing academic institutions. The Planning and Budgeting Committee, a member of which I am, is responsible for the planning and the budgeting of the higher education. So the 10 billion shekel budget is essentially handled by the Planning and Budgeting Committee. It constitutes a kind of buffer between the government and the universities, making sure that the academic freedom, which is anchored in law, is kept in the funding. Now, given that the funding comes from the government, we all feel that the government has something to say about how the money is spent, but nonetheless, there's this delicate balance, and I think most of us in higher education in Israel are actually rather pleased with the degree of freedom that we have and the way the Planning and Budgeting Committee does have a wide degree of freedom in determining how it allocates its budget. We are now at the end of a 6-year budgeting plan, okay, which essentially increased the budget for higher education over these past 6 years. The government at the time placed a number of goals, strategic goals, for that 6-year budget, including access for higher education to underrepresented populations like the minorities and the ultra-Orthodox, bringing excellent faculty or raising the number of excellent faculty in the universities, and promoting the humanities. However, since the other goals, the other strategic goals seemed always much more burning, and they required perhaps much more budget, there was earmarked budget, and there were dedicated teams which sat and thought how to promote these other goals. I actually believe that the policy planners in higher education in Israel are interested in furthering the humanities, but it's the kind of thing like the weather where everybody, nobody knows what to do about it, right? It may be the case, right? It may be the case that the funding of humanities requires less budget, right? Fewer resources than the funding of research, than the funding in natural sciences and education, and engineering. However, the fact that it costs less money doesn't mean that we shouldn't invest our resources in planning, because if we plan well, we can get a very significant return for our investment. Now we are in the process of planning for the next 5 or 6 year budget, and the heads of the leaders of the system of higher education in Israel have stated that they are interested in promoting humanities. The system as a whole has spent a lot of time bemoaning the steady decrease in the number of students that are studying humanities on the undergraduate level. Interestingly enough, at the MA level and at the PhD level, we do not find people suggesting that we don't have enough students. In fact, most of the deans claim that we have too many PhD students. But I don't want to talk about the decrease in students in the humanities. This is what draws most attention in public discussion of the humanities. I would like to talk about funding research in the humanities, because it's actually clear that unless we ensure the vitality of research in our research institutions, there's no future for humanities in the country. And once we ensure the vitality and the strength of our research centers, we will be able to deal, I believe, with the decrease in the number of students at the undergraduate level. And so let's talk about the funding of research in the humanities. All basic research in Israel is funded by the ISF, the Israel Science Foundation. The Israel Science Foundation is funded directly by the Planning and Budgeting Committee of the Council for Higher Education. Now, its budget has also been increasing steadily over the past number of years. If I'm not mistaken, Tamar, you will correct me if I'm, currently the budget is about $140 million. Is that correct? There are 3 broad areas. All the basic funding is funded by the ISF. It's also evaluated by the ISF. There are 3 broad areas for application and evaluation: humanities and social sciences, medical and biological sciences, and exact sciences and engineering. The issues that I would like to put, or those of us that plan this event would like to place at the center of discussion are there specific needs for funding research in the humanities? Are there methods for funding humanities which are different from funding basic research in other disciplines? Should the structure of the grant programs be different? Should the process of adjudication be different at all? One of the issues which concerns many of the researchers in the universities in Israel is that of funding of graduate students. Because as opposed to the situation that we find in the natural sciences, where students are typically funded through the grants of their supervisors because they are integrated in their labs and they carry out research directly related to the research of their supervisors. In the humanities, that is very often not the case, right? We often supervise students who do research related, right, thematically related, but not directly related to the research of their sponsors. One of the issues which I would like to place at the center of discussion here is the idea that in the sciences, the notion of technology transfer is a well-known and well-understood notion. Everybody understands what it means and its necessity. Even in the social sciences, I would say, people realize the contribution of academia to the development of public policy and government. We don't find a well-developed notion of the corresponding concept in the humanities, and that's why we have one of our sessions devoted to the notion of transfer of knowledge, right, and the notion of public humanities, which is well-developed other places in the world. It's also clear, and as Gavi said, it's clear that while many of us are interested in having the complete academic freedom to study whatever it is that we want, in order for us to be able to make the case to the government, we have to show the relevance of humanity to the society as a whole, and sort of just furthering the spirit of man sometimes doesn't do the job. It's fairly clear that interdisciplinary research today in the humanities, or with participation of humanists, is at the forefront in humanities around the world. And we are interested in learning from the participants in those of you who come from abroad, how it is that you promote interdisciplinary research through your granting structures. And finally, many of us who have been discussing the idea of promoting research in the humanities have come to the conclusion that it is perhaps best for us to join hands with other stakeholders who are interested in furthering the humanities. The current structure of funding humanities in Israel I wouldn't say that it doesn't allow it, but it doesn't encourage it, because we have the ISF, which does an excellent job in funding basic research, but the interface with cultural institutions and philanthropic organizations which would promote humanities in other sectors is essentially lacking here. The first session will be devoted to different notions of council structures, of structures for the councils which grant, which fund research in the humanities. And we're interested in knowing whether a different structure for the granting organization might help promote these goals, or perhaps will hinder. We are very interested in hearing and learning from what it is that you, from your experience abroad, and we thank you very, very, very much for agreeing to come and participate in this event today. Thank you very much. And I would like to invite Ted Hewitt to give his perspective on the event.
Thanks, Malka. And you have, pretty much surveyed the landscape of the things we're going to be doing over the next day and a half, so I don't want to repeat all that. But just to say and make a few comments to set the tone for the discussion that's about to begin. But first of all, let me say how pleased I am to be here today from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council in Ottawa. I want to thank our hosts as well, all of them. The Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities, the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, the Israel Young Academy, and the Council for Higher Education for hosting this event. And I want to say as well, for saving you from a minus 30-degree meeting in Ottawa, Canada, which was the alternative to this lovely venue, in fact. And many of us have been here for a day or two, and we're very much enjoying the city. So So, merci, monsieur. And I want to talk a little bit about, why we're here and how we got here. And Malka, I think, laid out the story, I think, quite well in early discussions that we had via Skype in Ambassador Barak's office. And we were talking about some of the issues, and Malka was trying to lay out the various scenarios here in Israel and the challenges. And as she was speaking, it sounded kind of familiar in one way or another. And I said, I think we may have more in common than you think, but why shouldn't we take the opportunity to pull together a few folks who we know and maybe talk about what the primary challenges are, what some of the successes are, what our prospects are in future, and the best way to do that would be to try and bring representatives from as many agencies as possible who fund social sciences or particularly humanities together to do that. We wanted a range. And your presence here from outside Israel and to some extent inside represents that range in terms of funding. So some of our agencies only fund humanities. Some fund social sciences and humanities. Some fund all different types of research with social sciences and humanities, as part of that array. So we wanted to have a bit of a mix of agencies that could talk to different experiences. I mean, one of the things I can tell you is that in my agency, we are the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. We do not fund the arts per se, although we fund research about the arts. And that's quite interesting. The other thing that I can say, and I'm sure this is going to come back again and again, everyone in Canada, well, maybe not everybody, but everybody in Canada who knows the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council now knows who the president is, and they know that the president is a sociologist. In other words, is not a humanist. And this itself has become a cause for some discussion, not that they don't like me, I think they do like me, but the fact of who the president is significant in this context. And will the next president be a humanist? Does this president understand our concerns, our issues? So in having this discussion today, I'm hoping there'll be tremendous benefit for our colleagues in Israel, but from what I said from the outset, there'll be tremendous benefit for us because we do not meet, collectively, at least on this scale, Europe, North America, the Americas, Israel, and more broadly to talk about humanities per se. I know there's huge interest in my country, on my own council, with respect to the outcome of this meeting, so our expectations are very high, and I think that we're going to come away very, very satisfied. You'll see from the agenda that we're not going to focus so much, I'm not going to say not at all, but we're not going to focus so much on discussing the value of the humanities. I think if we can't take that for granted in this group, we've got a serious, serious problem. So I think we need to start from the point that we do provide value in humanities research, and I can recite chapter and verse day and night why that is so. And what I always tell my colleagues after I get completely exasperated is to just describe for me a world where the humanities don't exist and tell me whether you want to live there or not. And sometimes that pretty much gets us where we need to go. We are going to talk about a lot of issues that are related to how we support the humanities and how, to some extent, we convey value. And in this, I just need to grab my other note. There are 6 things in particular that we want to touch on among a whole range. So first of all, the types of research projects that are funded in the humanities. What are the differences between research projects funded in humanities versus other disciplines within humanities? How are they reviewed? How research how graduate students are funded and so forth. We do want to talk, as Malka mentioned, about modes of knowledge transfer. What does that constitute? Is it publication in journals? Are there new and exciting means by which knowledge is being transferred in the humanities currently? And we're certainly aware of some of those. The digital humanities, thirdly, has become a topic of very hot discussion. I've seen some of the biggest databases that now exist in the digital humanities because of the great volume of data required for textual and visual analysis. I have a colleague in music who's studying music downloads and this is quite interesting. We'll talk about this, but I couldn't resist. He's studying music downloads using Nokia's database, and what he has discovered is that the pattern of download is associated with political unrest. He actually analyzed download patterns in the Middle East during the Arab Spring to see what people were downloading and when they were downloading, and he actually could predict, going back, not what events, but when events would occur and how long they would last, even to the point where he now has a scale. Using downloading patterns, he can predict within a point or two the GDP of a country. Because download patterns are different in Israel than they are in Canada, than they are in Rwanda, than they are in Thailand. So this is amazing data. It's a huge database. Music Prof. Open access is becoming another issue that we need to discuss in the humanities concept. Lots of misconception out there in my community in Canada, I know elsewhere. We need to talk about what that entails, how that relates to humanities researchers, how we can create the value structure for this and convey that to our community. Interdisciplinary research is the fifth topic we're going to look at today. How does this strengthen the humanities? How do humanists work together? How do they work together with others? You know, can we get out of the GELS, we call it in Canada now, the GELS ghetto, you know, where humanities researchers and to some extent social science researchers get brought in at the tail end of a project to talk about things like ethics and legal structures and governance and so forth. You know, this is not, to my mind, it's nice, you know, that they think of us, but for the most part in interdisciplinary research, humanities researchers should be there at the beginning, they should be there in the middle, and they should be there at the end, and how do we do that? And then the last thing, which may in fact be the first thing, around optimal granting council structures. Are we happy with the models that we currently have in our countries? What are some of the challenges with those? What are some ways in which we're transforming currently? Because we are, some of us, we're in transition. If we had all the money in the world, what would the perfect humanities research council look like, and so on and so forth. So that's what the day is going to look like. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. We've certainly in Canada barely had a chance to discuss such things. I have said on a number of events lately on the public humanities, on the future of the PhD in humanities, but never this broadly and never at this scale in terms of the number of agencies from this number of countries. So I'm very much looking forward to today and tomorrow. And if it's okay, I think I'll just leave it at that and say once again thank you to the organizers and all of you for coming to this event. Thank you.